This week, I'm sharing 10 easy script lettering styles anyone can do. We'll start with a brief overview of type anatomy, then we'll move on to beginner-friendly exercises to inject personality and character into all of your future styles. I'm using a screen-size canvas and the only color we're using is black, so let's get into it. I've got my screen size canvas. You can really use any size canvas you'd like for this. The first thing we're going to do is lay down a guide. So I'm going to head into my Tuesday lettering guide brushes. I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description to this. This just makes it really easy to create guidelines wherever you need them, whenever you need them, instead of just using regular practice sheets. So we can just paint these in. And when you paint them in, you're kind of looking for the set that has two lines together right here. That would be a full set, and if you stop short, you can always paint the rest in. It'll pick up right where it left off. So I have one full line of guides, so it's the two together, and then here's the bottom one. Once it starts painting it again, you can paint multiple rows of guides if you would like. That's how the brush is programmed, so we can just do that. I'm going to come up here and I'll give you a very basic kind of SparkNotes version of type anatomy and basic structure terms that are important to be aware of. So I'm going to create a brand new layer. I'm going to change my brush to the beautiful Lettering Mono Weight Pro brush. I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description to this brush set. This brush set has numerous different brushes designed specifically for changing up the feel or the style of your lettering. And the practice brushes change colors. You can't have black selected, obviously, but if you have a different color selected, any of the practice brushes will change color with the pressure you put on them, so that can be really helpful. I'm going to be using the Mono Weight Pro because we're keeping things super basic and simple for these exercises, and my brush size is about 5% for this. So the first thing you need to know is this topmost line is your ascender line. This is where any of your ascenders, if I have a lowercase d, for example, this is an ascender, this stroke right here. So this stroke's going to come all the way to this top line, and that's the ascender line. This second line is your cap height. If I have an uppercase A, for example, it's going to extend all the way up to the cap height. This doesn't always have to be the case where the ascender is taller than the cap height. Generally, they are in standardized type world, but since we're creating hand-lettered styles, it can be the same or they can be reversed. It's up to you how you'd like to create your styles. I'm just giving you a general idea of how things work. And then the next line right here, this is your X height. So it's the height of a lowercase x is a really easy way to remember it, and a lot of your lowercase letters that don't have ascenders are going to extend up to the X height. Where everything sits is your baseline right here. So if I have a lowercase b, it's going to sit right along the baseline. Most of your capital letters are going to sit right along the baseline. And then this bottom one is your descender line. So any descenders, like if I have a lowercase g, this is your descender of your G, and it's going to come all the way down here and hit here. So those are the basic terms. You're probably pretty familiar with how a lot of these hit already. So that was just a quick overview. Now we can get to the fun part, which is talking about how to create and change up our styles. I'm going to turn this layer off. I'm going to create a brand new layer. And for all of these examples, I'm going to use the word hey because it's got an ascender, an X height character, and a descender. So if I just do a script hey, so I'm going to start right here. This would be style number 1. This is just the standard script style is what I'm calling it, because the height of the ascender and the descender are very similar, and that size is also very similar to the X height. You typically don't want them all to be exactly the same, but they're pretty similar in size right here, so this will give us a really good starting point. I'm calling this the standard script style. So this would be style number 1. I'll just label this one number 1. Style number 2, we're going to change. We're just going to make some really small tweaks, and we're going to see how it affects how things feel and how they look. In the second style, we're going to change up the ascender. So I mentioned before that the ascender and the descender and the X height are all pretty similar in size right here. We're going to keep the X height and the descender the exact same, but now we're going to change the height of our ascender. We're going to make it taller and shorter, and we're going to see how that influences how the lettering feels to us. So I'm going to write it exactly the same, only I'm going to have a taller ascender and a shorter ascender this time. And if you'd like to alter your guidelines, a really easy way to do that, these are my guides right here. I'm just going to label this one guides. If I grab my selection tool and I choose rectangle right here, I can just select the ascender and then I can just toggle it up. So I'm making this one taller. I'm going to make it significantly taller so it's really obvious the changes that are happening. And then I'll select these ones and I'll make these ones shorter. So you can kind of see the direct comparison right here. So we're only affecting the ascender here. I'm going to return back to this layer that just has the hay on it, and I'll put my other ones on here. I still have Monoweight Pro selected as my brush, and now I'm going to come all the way up here because I have a really tall ascender, but everything else is going to be exactly the same. And now I'm going to have a really short ascender. All right, and now if I turn off my guides, you can see how much of a difference that makes just looking at the different words, how it feels different. And the only thing we changed was the height of our ascender. So this is style number 2. I can turn my guides back on, and now for style number 3, we're going to alter the descender. So we're starting out with our base, which is the standard script. It's the same that we used for our style number 1, only this time we're going to change the height or the length of our descender. So I'm going to come back to the guides, hit my selection, make sure you have rectangle selected down here, and it's just this bottom line that we're changing. So I can grab that and just make it a little bit longer here, or a lot bit longer. Deselect, and now select it again. This time we're going to make it a lot shorter. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to my hay layer, and I've got my Monoweight Pro brush, and we're going to make that Y really long. And now it's going to be really short for this one. And remember, there is a middle ground here. I'm just making it very obvious how much of a difference this can make. So if we look at it without the guides, we can kind of compare everything here. This is our original standard. This one has different ascenders, and this one has different descenders. So that is going to be number 3. I'm going to turn my guides back on, and you can probably guess the next one. The next one we're going to change is our X height. So this line right here, the one right above the baseline, I'm going to come back to my guides layer, select, and I still have rectangle selected, and I'm just going to grab the X height and make it taller. Everything else I'm keeping the same, but you could absolutely change your ascender and descender as well. I like changing in small increments to see what I like and what I don't like, and then add on or subtract from there. So that's going to have a higher X height, and now we're going to do a lower X height for this one. Okay, I'm going to come back to my hay layer and got my brush, same brush we've been using, and this time we've changed our X height. And this one's going to have a shorter X height. Now we can look at everything together. I'm going to turn off the guides layer, and just changing those guidelines, what a difference that makes. This is almost starting to look like an N. I'm not personally a huge fan of having a taller X height, but I am a big fan of having a shorter X height. I always kind of like it when I've got my ascender and my descender appearing a bit larger than my X height. So this would be my preference personally. And I also like just the standard too. So that is our first 4 styles. I can label this 4th one. And now we're going to add a little more complexity to things. I'm going to turn my guide layer back on, and I'm going to create a brand new layer right above it. And this time we're going to play around with the different angles that you can write your letters at. We've been kind of keeping an upright or slight italics to ours to this point. So I want you to see a comparison of fully upright, a slight italics, and then a full italics. So you can get an idea of how that influences the feel and the personality of your lettering. So I'm going to come back into my Tuesday Lettering Guides brush set, and I've got 3 different angle options right here. I've got a vertical, subtle italics, and italics. So I'm going to select the vertical first, and this writes as a pattern brush. So I can just paint right over my guidelines, and now I've got my angle and I've got my structure. It makes it really easy to accomplish both right here. I'm gonna not make that so long, so I've got a little more room here. So there's my vertical. I'm gonna switch to my subtle italics next. I'll put those right here. And then I'll switch to my full italics. And you can see how that angle changes depending on what it is. So now I'm going to come back up to my hay layer, change my brush to the Mono8 Pro again. And now we'll do the upright. So we're just following these lines for our verticals. So there's that one. Now we'll do the subtle italics, and then we'll do the full italics, and then we'll look at all of them together. I'm going to turn off both guidelines now because we've got our horizontal guidelines and then we've got our angles. So now if we look at just these 3, you can see how different they feel just based on the angle. Like this one feels much more casual than this one does. This one feels like a rule follower. We're pretty strict with our letters. This one's a little looser. This one's going to the beach for the day. It's pretty cool how much you can influence how much personality your lettering has just by changing the smallest things, because we haven't even tackled line weight yet. We've just changed up our angle and our guide heights, and already we can see a huge change in how different things feel. So now we're going to move on to those line weights with style number 6. So let me label this one as number 5 for these ones. I'll turn my guide layer back on. We're kind of running out of room. I think I'm going to draw in some new guides down here since now we're getting into line weights. So I'll come back to my guides layer and grab my standard, and I'll paint in some new ones down here. Okay, I'm gonna label this one hay, and maybe we'll create a brand new layer this time for all the line weight ones. So I'll just label this one weight. I'm going to return back to my Mono8 Pro brush, and we will just write out the word hay, however you would like to write it. If you want to use one of these other guides, I have several in here with the settings already applied to the exercises we've already done, like a shorter X height, a taller X height, taller ascenders and descenders, and then I've got extra tall and extra short and short as well. So if any of those appeal to you, I've already created these guides as pattern brushes, so you can just paint them in. You don't have to alter them manually. And then your letters will be way more consistent that way as well. I'm just going to stick with the standard since that's what we've been using. And I've got my Mono8 Pro once again. And style number 6 is going to be faux calligraphy, which is very beginner friendly. If you're new to adding weight to your letter forms, faux calligraphy will help you get a lot of really good practice before you move on to pressure sensitive lettering brushes. So how this works is we're just going to create our lettering. And now we're going to add weight only to the downstroke. So whenever you created your lettering, whenever your hand was coming down, that's a downstroke. So we're just going to add weight to it. But the kicker is whenever you're adding this weight, however thick you just made this stroke, you have to make all of your downstrokes the same thickness. You can't just sporadically make them as thick or as thin as you want as you go through it. They all have to be really consistent. It'll just make everything look far more professional when you have that consistency throughout your line weights. So I'm trying to do like a perfect 2 here. And there we go. So that would be faux calligraphy, where you write it out and then you go in and you add your thickness in. Let me label this one as number 6. I have a cheat sheet with all the styles that we're going over right here. So you can download it, you can print them out, you can have them handy if you want to go through all these practice exercises with a little reference sheet. I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description of where you can go and download that. On to number 7. Number 7 is adding universal weight. So right here we've got a contrast in our weight. We've got thin strokes and we've got thick strokes. So now we're going to see how having a universal weight increase or decrease affects the personality or character of our lettering. So in order to do this, I need to create a brand new layer because I need to make some copies of this. I'm going to write out my lettering. This brush is at 5%, and next I'm going to create a brand new layer right above that. I'm going to increase my brush size up to like 8%, and I'm just going to trace right over this so we can compare. And I'll move it over. Let me turn my magnetics and snapping on so I can keep it straight as I move it. And now I'm going to create a brand new layer, and this time I'm going to make it even thicker still. I'm going to come up to 12%, and I'm going to trace over the original again. And then I'll move this one over. So we've got our regular, our semi-bold, and our heavy bold or extra bold right here. So you can see immediately how they feel different. This one's saying, hey, pay attention, and this one's like, I really want your attention right now. I can merge these layers together, and I'm going to call this one, let me bring my size back down to 5%. This one's going to be style number 7. Number 8 is pretty simple. I'm going to come back to my weight layer. Style number 8 says your initial stroke and your exit stroke have to be similar in style. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. An initial stroke is the first stroke of the first letter of your word. So it would be this one right here. And then the exit stroke would be the last stroke of the last letter in your word. So it would be this one. So this rule basically says that this stroke and this stroke have to be similar in appearance. I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can make that happen. So I could have my hey look like this. And you can kind of see I've got a slight curve right here. I've got a slight curve right here. So these ones would pass that test. I could add an embellishment, like a little teardrop to the ends, and now they're still consistent. I could add kind of like an open, blunt stroke, and that would be consistent. I could have this one be a little curvier, and if this one gets curvier, then this one needs to get curvier, and then that's consistent. So that's what you want to be happening. I'm just going to leave the teardrops on here as the example. That's what you want to happen with style number 8. All right, style number 9 is pretty similar. We're just going to add in some flourishing, but we're going to make sure that we still stylistically are being really consistent with our initial strokes and our exit strokes. So I'm going to, let's come down to this one right here. The flourishing one will say if I have a big curve right here, I need to have a big curve at the end, but I can also bring in some flourishing into it. So I can, why is there a great opportunity to add flourishing? So if I do this, this is going to be consistent because I've got this nice curve. This part is actually also mimicked in this loop of the Y and right here. So this is a successful execution. If I did something like this, you can see it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel like it's all consistent and that they all belong together because I've got this nice loop right here, but it starts off without it. So it doesn't feel like it's part of the same letter or same forms. So that's the thing you want to be aware of when you decide to introduce anything that looks unique, like these curves here or here. You want to make sure that they're looking consistent. Consistency is like the name of the game here. If I tell you nothing else in this entire video, it's make everything consistent. You want consistent weights when you change things. You want consistent curves or embellishments. Everything should be consistent. It is the telltale sign of a professional letterer when their strokes, their weights, and their embellishments are consistent. All right, so this one I'm going to label as number 9. This is adding flourishing. So it's just some extra stylized elements where you're still keeping your initial and exit strokes similar. But if you bring in this flourishing, it's also going to reference that. It doesn't have to be exact. Like if I wanted to do, I'll give you another example of this one. If I wanted to do something curvy like this, even if I wanted to like bring a loop into it and bring this down, you can see I've got this nice curve, I've got this nice curve, I've got this nice curve. Everything still feels like it belongs together. Even though I don't have a loop right here and I've got a loop right here, the general feel of all of the forms and the curves remain consistent. Let's move on to our last one, number 10. This one's a really easy one. We're just going to change up our tool, whatever tool you use to create your lettering. So if I come down here to my Dried Ink Pro brush, you can see how different writing with a different tool makes your style feel. These ones are pressure sensitive, so the faux calligraphy, it's basically doing what faux calligraphy does, but we're doing it as we write, which is why faux calligraphy is really good for beginners to practice before you move on to using these pressure sensitive lettering brushes, because you want to keep the weight you're putting on your brush similar as you write it. I've got my Blunt Crayon Pro, so you can see how this feels different than the other ones. I'll do one more. I've got the Streaky Paint Pro. So that is all about changing up the tool to influence the style. And label this number 10. And if you've made this far, I'm going to reward you with some bonus ideas for other things you can do to influence style, especially as a beginner. These are extra little tweaks that you can make, and they can make a huge difference. If you're ever interested in converting your lettering styles to a font, I've got an entire course on that. I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description. These are all great techniques to infuse or to experiment with the different types of fonts that you may want to make. You can also use this if you're expanding your skill set to create SVGs, or if you want to freelance your lettering. I've got a course, Beautiful Lettering in Procreate, that'll show you exactly how to create trending sellable styles. So I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description to that as well. So these bonus ideas. I'm going to grab my Inky Edge Pro brush for this. This is one of my favorite lettering brushes. It's got a little bit of texture to it, and there's pressure sensitivity. So on this last line right here, I'm going to give you, what do I have, like 3 or 4 different bonus ideas. The first one is changing up your caps. So traditionally we have an uppercase followed by lowercase letters, but if you wanted to mix your style by having some uppercase mixed in with lowercase, that's a way to change your style. So that's like bonus idea number 1. And then another one would be to break your script. So traditionally you would have everything connected, but say you want to break it. So my H's are by themselves, and then maybe I have something like my R's break the script. So that's another way to infuse your own style, and you can still change up your ascender height, your X height, your descender. These are all things that you can still apply to whatever minute changes you make within your letter forms. Another one, I feel like this one doesn't get talked about enough. If you have like an H that looks like this, where it's got the loop, then you want to include the loops in your descenders. Your ascenders have loops, your descenders should have loops. If they don't have loops, then you want to make sure your descenders don't have loops. So this is what this would look like. So you want to just make sure that these are consistent. Whatever style you choose to make, like you could have a D that looks like this, and then you've got a loop here, but this same word would look like this. So you just want to make sure you're being consistent here as well. I need to draw in some more guides, so I'll do that really quick. All right, and then the last one is just being consistent with ligatures. So ligatures are pairings of usually 2 or 3 letters at a time. So like ing would be a ligature because there's so many words that have ing in it. And whenever this appears, you always want it to look the same. So if you do something special with it, like if I had my in and and then I had the G like tucked in here. Wherever it would appear, you always want to make sure that's consistent. Other popular ligature combinations would be like a TH, if that's a special situation, like if I have think, thoughts. You just want to make sure that this TH, wherever it appears, always looks the same. Other ones would be like SH, ST, GH. There's all kinds of them. Once you start thinking about words that have common letter combinations in them, those work really well as ligatures. So that's another tip. And then your end forms. There's a lot of words, especially in the English language, that end in S. So if I want to do something special, whenever a word ends in S, if the exit stem of the S appears like this, I just want to make sure it's consistent wherever else I write it. You could also do it with T's, like if they're written out like this normally, but your word ends in a T, maybe every time you've got a word that ends in a T, it looks like this instead of your traditional, like you would expect. And that can make it feel special, but as long as you keep it consistent for all words that end in a T, that just takes your lettering to a whole other level of professionalism. So those are some bonus tips. If you're a beginner and you're looking to elevate your lettering a little bit further, practice those and your lettering will definitely become more elevated. So those are 10 easy script lettering styles for beginners, along with some bonus ideas. And once again, make sure to head to the link in the video description to download your free practice sheets. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you next time.